Welcome to the Ozone. I'm Robin Trimingham of the Olderhood Group, and my guest today is Olderhood Chairman Bill Storie. This is part 2 of our discussion on leadership. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Robin. How you doing?
I'm good. So in our last discussion, we were talking about some of the challenges of leadership in today's world. And I want to spend a little more time talking about a couple of the things that came up in our previous conversation. So you were talking quite a bit about the importance and the attributes of self-leadership. So talk to us a little about some of the external forces, outside forces, if you will, that impact or affect your internal self-leadership.
Yeah, I think, that's right. Self-leadership is deciding what you want to do and trying to achieve that. So those are the attributes or the characteristics of yourself so that you say, I want to be stronger or, weaker or bolder or speak up more, whatever. Those are characteristics that you have inside of you. Now, ideally, obviously, you want them to be a good characteristics to make you into a better leader or a good leader. But you're right. Certainly in today's world, there are so many what I would call outside forces that influence you and your thinking. In other words, there are situations where, frankly, rather than sort of doing things the way you would like to do them, you are forced, perhaps, for example, by company policy. The company policy may be to go after revenue, but not to spend too much time on, employee performance or employee satisfaction. And that's perhaps not in sync with what you would like to do. So in that case, you've got a policy being dictated to you by the company or by, your boss. And I think, previously we chatted about social media. To be honest, I don't think there's much bigger influence these days than social media. That, when somebody has, 10,000 or 100,000 followers on Twitter and they say something wrong, all of a sudden there's an avalanche, there's a tsunami of, comments, etc., coming in. That unquestionably influences the thought of the person who started, the conversation. Does it change their mind? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I'm not sure. But then, you've got things like family. Family will perhaps be telling you, you're a bit pushy, or you're a bit this, or you're a bit that. I hope you don't act like that when you're at work. Because people don't like to be pushed around. So I think there's so many outside influences that unquestionably will affect your leadership style and your leadership your capabilities, I think.
I want to touch on one of the points that you raised just at the beginning there, where you were making the point that sometimes your personal leadership, the things that you value, are running sort of counter to the mandates or the culture of the company that you're with. Prior to the pandemic, a lot of people would have said, I'm just going to go and look for a job that's more aligned with my personal values. But now it's maybe not all that easy to make a career change. There's a lot of risk involved in doing something like that at the moment. So how would you recommend that people stay true to themselves as best as possible and still, make peace with the fact that they're with this organization?
That's a great question, because I think there's an underlying issue to that question, because I think the challenge is that as you get older, and some of us can think back not only a few years, but a few decades, there was a culture within the business world where, you just got on with it. So in other words, if the company said we're going to do this, you did it. If the boss said we're going to do this, you did it. You didn't challenge. Now, whether that was because, just that's the way life was back in those days? I'm not sure. Was that an element of respect, that you had respect for the boss or the company or whomever? Therefore, you just go on with it. Was it impacted by you needed the job, you needed the money, you had a family to feed? Perhaps. But those days have changed. Those days have now changed quite dramatically. So no, I'm not suggesting that, if the boss says, let's turn left, and you say, no, we need to turn right, and you have a fight about it. I'm not suggesting that. But there is much more opportunity these days for people or employees or whatever to challenge the boss or to challenge the company, from a whole range of reasons, whether that is cultural, sometimes it's political, unfortunately. There are so many reasons nowadays that gives everyone the opportunity to, I guess, speak their own mind. And if it is contrary to company policy, a lot of people these days don't care.
Let's change it up here a little bit and talk about leadership and mentoring for a minute, because a couple of years ago, an awful lot of companies had mentoring programs, had work shadowing programs, actively encouraged people to learn from each other and to learn from the more experienced members of the team. And now that we have so much social distancing and remote working taking place, how important is it for a leader to continue to find and nurture people and to go the extra mile to make that happen, even in uncomfortable or unfamiliar circumstances?
It's vitally important. It's now, because we're in as you call it, the remote type of environment, whether we're actually back at work these days or whether we're still partially working from home, that the team leader must show various characteristics that perhaps he or she hasn't done much of in the past. Obviously, things like inspiration, they've got to be inspiring their team, because they recognize that if a person's working at home, so that they're only working through, Zoom meetings or whatever sort of thing, that, even if they're sitting in their pajamas, who cares? You've got to give that support level to those people, because they're going through enough at home, perhaps, with family, lockdown type situations. So therefore, inspiration, I think, is probably pretty high up in that list. I think another word is integrity. You've got to treat people with integrity. You've got to have integrity yourself, but you must convey that integrity and treat people correctly. You're going to have ups and downs. I mean, that's obvious. You're going to have that. Mm-hmm. But if the underlying force is one of treating people correctly and fairly and respectfully, then, your team is going to benefit from that. Frankly, you will as well, because maybe there are things that you haven't paid much attention to in the past, whereas now, whether it's because of pandemic-related issues or not, I think just the whole attitude of the business world in particular has dramatically changed, so that you now must be paying attention to things that, frankly, you maybe didn't even consider. 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or in some cases 15, 20, 25 years ago. Things have changed. Things are going to keep changing.
I absolutely, they will. Well, we're just about out of time here. Bill, thank you as always for chatting with us today. You've been watching the Ozone. Join us again soon.